So there was some testimony on direct about not finding animal bones up at Rumlet Park, not finding bear tracks, not finding anything that looks like an animal den.
Mm-hmm.
There was a search that was done with Leah Foster, who Your Honor will recall helped find the skull. The first search that was done, I think it was the first search, I should double check that. But anyway, when they went up there, they went up with cadaver dogs, and they were looking for bones. And they did find bones. They found long bones of an animal. And that's testimony I would like to elicit. I understand that Your Honor is uncomfortable with any testimonies with respect to cadaver dogs.
Well, not only that, but you're not going to be able to do that with the cadaver dog portion of it.
The intent here is not, of course, to have Lieutenant Ezzell speak beyond his expertise. I know that he doesn't know handler science, or at least I'm not expecting to elicit anything along those lines. But I believe, based on the reports I've reviewed, that he was present when the dog alerted, the bones were collected, and then taken out and discovered to be animal bones.
Again, the fact that you have a problem with the dog finding bones? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, no, this is Ezzell.
No, I understand that the court's ruling.
All right.
I think the court's ruling is that dogs are viable. And for the institution, that some other dogs are not certified for healing
That wasn't my question. My question was, do you object if it's just a dog found some bones as opposed to the cadaver dog?
Yes, because my request is to be bones that question and just do that and stop that without it.
Okay.
The basis of my request is that we have had similar testimony as to what Your Honor is suggesting could be a way of presenting this, which was Lee Patterson, the dog Kiki, finding a bone on the mountain. It turned out to be one of Dylan's bones. But that type of evidence has come in, elicited by the prosecution, and it was human bones. I think that I would keep it limited to you observed the dog alert, you saw the bone that was collected, the bone turned out not to be human.
Yeah, but there's no reason to even mention the word dog unless you're trying to make it look to the jury as though dogs are inaccurate, which hopefully you have your own experts, and we've also been doing as much cross-examination on that as possible, it seems like. So I'm going to eliminate or prohibit you from talking about the fact that the dog found it just because it was found at a certain time.
Understood.
I do too. Thank you, Ms. Franklin. Seven's one up. It'll be a minute or two. Yes. In fact, I need my water anyway.
Mr. Moran, is that also a video?
No, that is Celebrate.
What's the age of the
Page 1.
Yeah, wait up here. We can be seated.
All right, may the witness approach the stand.
We're not on the record yet?
Okay.
I was going to put it on the record. Mr. Ezzell, come on back up. You're still under oath. Go ahead, Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Lieutenant Ezzell.
Good afternoon.
My understanding is that as the supervising investigator, as the lieutenant, that the buck stops with you on this case. Is that fair?
Yes.
And you were supervising other investigators who worked on this case, obviously. That's right?
Yes.
And you assigned lead investigators over time. Is that right?
At the very beginning, I did, yes.
So were there multiple lead investigators as this case moved through the different years?
Counting myself, I believe there were 3.
Those 3 separate lead investigators?
Yes.
There was some testimony on direct with respect to days that you calculated Mr. Redwine was present in town and that Dylan could have been with him. You recall that testimony, obviously?
Yes, based on the work schedule.
But there were other sources of information available to you, so you would agree with that, right? With respect to when Mr. Redwine was in town, at the same time Dylan was in town, to be specific.
Could you show me what you're talking about?
Sure. Permission to publish People's 480.
Sure.
So you calculated somewhere in the neighborhood, 93 days that Mark and Dylan, or at least that Mark was in town and could have been with Dylan in Durango, right?
I believe it was 94 days just based on the work schedule.
But you did not include in what you described for the jury the occasion on May 27, 2012, when Dylan was in town visiting his father, spending time with his father. Is that fair?
Objection, Judge. I think that mischaracterizes the evidence.
Well, you can, Mr. Ezzell can, or Lieutenant Ezzell can correct him if he's wrong.
So your testimony did not include the fact that Mark and Dylan were together in Durango on May 27, 2012, right?
This refreshes my memory here. I did not recall this text.
So on this occasion, that was not included in your description of times when Dylan and Mark were together. We have proof that that is inaccurate. So the description of times worked and when Mr. Redwine was in town, at least on this score, is wrong. Would you agree?
Yes, at least on this score.
I could trouble counsel to go to page 6. This text exchange between Dylan and his father, Mark Redwine, demonstrates another occasion on which Dylan and Mark were in Durango and interacting with each other together. Would you agree?
It's my understanding from this that Dylan was in the Durango area, but not staying at Mark's house.
I could have counsel. So your testimony now is that Dylan and Mark weren't staying together at the time?
It's my understanding that Dylan was staying at a friend's house.
I could have counsel scroll to page 5. this would indicate that Mark is picking Dylan up, right?
Yes, but not at his house.
But you didn't include this as one of the occasions that Mark was in town and spending time with Dylan, right?
At his house.
No, that wasn't the testimony. The times that Mr. Redwine was in town based on the record from Mr. Redwine's employer. Times when he was in town excluded this date, correct?
For the purpose that you're describing, yes.
And this was, in fact, an occasion Mr. Redwine was in town in Durango, right?
Yes.
I can have that taken down, thank you. Lieutenant Ezzell, as the supervising lieutenant on this case, you would agree that making compilations and summing things up, that it's critical to be accurate?
Yes.
If I could have counsel play that video that we discussed, it's People's Exhibit 360, the time on it, I forget what we talked about, maybe 2:40, 2:35, anything before 2:45, then 10 seconds, it's fine. Can I have you start just a little bit forward of this? Well, this is fine. For the record, this is being started at 2:30. My understanding is that we're looking to the south.
Is that a question?
Yes. Lieutenant Ezzell, at this minute mark, are we looking to the south from Runlet Park?
Pretty much to the south, southeast.
Could begin this, please. And Your Honor, may I have permission to move about the way?
Yes, go ahead.
If I could have a pause here.
Take the microphone, please.
So this clearing that we're seeing here kind of extends as we'll spin more towards where you parked and voted at the top of the image. That probably makes a terrible record. Anyway, are you following me?
Yes.
That this clearing is sort of separated by this aspen grove, and then there's another clearing. Headed towards the north.
And can you read what the time is on it?
Yes, 2:41. It's panning to the north, correct?
Yes, it is.
And my understanding of your testimony was that you're not finding animal bones in there. Did I understand you correctly?
No.
All right, if you keep rotating it. Your Honor, I'm sorry to interrupt.
You stop it for a second.
Yes. That answer and the colloquy was unclear to me.
It was unclear to me, too, as to how he was answering, though. So could you clarify that?
That's fine, and I think that we were a little bit too far to the south and east. At any rate, as we get this way,
Well,
it'll be more clear. So I can withdraw the last question.
all right, the jury can disregard the last answer then. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry. And it's at 2:46, if I got counted right. Stop it here, thank you. So we're at the 2:minute 53 second mark, right? Is this the area you were describing that you're looking around in and not finding any bones?
That is not. The area that I'm referring to is the immediate vicinity of where the skull was recovered.
So that's approximately right in here.
No.
Okay. Is it going to be at all on this video?
I'm sorry, is what going to be on the video?
The location of the skull?
Yes.
Okay. You keep moving it. Oh, I'm sorry, stop again. So 2:54. Then you would agree that this area here is covered in animal bones.
I would not say covered, but there were animal bones up in Runlet Park, in the meadow, and up on the ridge in the tree line up in there. But the area I'm referring to is the immediate vicinity of where the skull was located, which is approximately under the drone, there were no other bones in that immediate vicinity.
I see. And what radius were you describing around the skull?
Well, we went approximately 200 feet down below the skull and worked our way back up. Did not find any animal bones through that area.
So from the drone is positioned in this image directly down, is that right? From where the skull is, like it's above the GPS location?
It's generally above that location. I can't tell you if it's precisely over if the wind was blowing the drone around that day.
Okay. Fair to say, though, that an individual walking around from the road to this area would find all kinds of bones.
Again, the characterization of all kinds of bones is not something that I would say, but if you walk across that meadow from Middle Mountain Road, you will find animal bones scattered about, mostly cows. And once you get into the tree line where the skull was located, I found no bones except for the skull.
So in this area, you're finding cow bones. Did law enforcement ever determine what was eating those cows?
No.
I could have counsel take that down. I appreciate you queuing that for us. Thank you. And just to get real complicated here, I'm going to ask to publish Defense Exhibit 1893. July 16 and July of 2016 and August of 2018. So there was obviously the occasion when you were there with the Fosters in 2015. Were there others?
Yes.
And how many people were involved?
The number of people varied depending on what our specific purpose or mission was on those given days. We had anywhere from 3 or 4 individuals to up to a dozen.
And so besides July of 2016 and August of 2018, when?
Don't recall the specific dates, but we went up into that area several times. I've been up into that area multiple times by myself. back in June of 2013 when we did the search of Middle Mountain Road. We had search teams that started in the Runlet Park area.
I could have council go to 517, people would go to 517. Permission to approach?
Yes.
Sir, if I understood your direct testimony, you acknowledge that this exhibit is an approximation, first of all, right?
Correct.
And that this isn't to suggest that there have been boots on the ground on every area that's marked here in this peach type color, right?
That's correct.
And if I understood your direct testimony properly, you described that this space in here was searched by helicopter. Is that right?
That area in there, portions of it were searched with boots on the ground, and portions were searched by helicopter.
There's an area below this that has not been marked. Is that all area that was searched by helicopter?
I couldn't say specifically if they flew into that drainage there. What I can tell you is that we had teams go down the cliff face on ropes.
Given that this is an approximation and it is not the sum of everything that's been searched, is it overbroad or underbroad?
My belief is that we could show some additional areas.
But the description on direct examination was that, and this has been repeated throughout the trial, that we have essentially impenetrable landscape. Would you agree that that's been testimony you've heard during the pendency of this trial?
I have heard that, and I have seen it.
Okay. So that you would agree with that testimony that what we're talking about here is so much deadfall, so cliffed out, that this is not a space that a human could traverse.
I think a determined human could traverse it, but it is full of cliffs and deadfalls, very rough ground.
So you still have not crossed the bridge and hiked the waterfall trail, have you?
If you're referring to the trail that's coming off of Black Bear Lane, it's my understanding that trail was not in existence as an improved trail in 2012.
My question was, you have still not walked that trail, have you?
I have not walked such a trail.
And you would agree with me that some of these areas were cleared by by helicopter?
Yes.
If I could have counsel go to Exhibit 362, and I'll be looking for the 15-second mark. Yes, sir. This is 62, I think. The screen reads site number 1, Redwine home. There's an X marking Mr. Redwine's house. This is drone footage. We're starting to 05 second mark. What we're doing is going straight at the cliff. Agree?
Mostly straight at the cliffs, yes.
Had we gone south, there would not be, it wouldn't be as cliffed out as we see sort of center left in this image, right?
That's correct. There's not near the size of cliffs in that area if you turn further south.
And this waterfall that we keep talking about is because there is a stream that creates a watershed that would be less impenetrable than these cliffs going south, right?
I wouldn't say less impenetrable, but I would say less steep.
Less steep. Is that right?
Less steep than cliffs, yes.
Okay, you play. So we're stopping here at the 15-second mark. You agree that this drone is now taking a bit of the dog leg. We're moving to the left with the drone, right?
I can't tell you if that's an intentional move on his part or due to the wind at that level, but yes, the drone is actually making more of an angle towards the Site 2, which is the purpose of this video.
So the operator was not instructed to fly the drone at the cliff?
The operator was instructed to fly the drone towards Site 2, which is just beyond the cliffs.
Was there any discussion about taking the most direct route?
That is the most direct route. We're talking a straight line.
Right. Okay. So that's what the drone operator was instructed to do?
Correct.
Is that a drone that you can program the GPS into?
I'm not familiar with the drone operator's equipment.
Okay. If I can have that played here, please. Stop it here, please. So we're stopping here at about the 43-second mark. You would agree that to the south, so towards you in this image, that's a plateau would make it sound too flat, but it's not. It's not like this section that's on the left side of the street. To the south, you could walk without significant elevation.
I can tell you that the difference in terrain from the location of Mark's residence, which is about 7,800 feet.
So but what I'm talking about here is, I think plateau is actually an appropriate term for what would be to the south. There would not be another cliff band to the south for at least a month.
There's not another cliff band right through that area, but the elevation is still the same.
Play it for a few more seconds. Thank you. So if I could just stop, thank you. At about 57 seconds, the drone that had gone to the left to take in those beautiful cliffs is now cutting from the north back to the south. Would you agree?
No, I would have to watch that again. I didn't see what you're talking about.
That's fine. I could keep playing. Okay, I think that's sufficient. Thank you. There was some description of how the drone operator had to relocate. That's because the drone operator started at Mr. Redwine's house. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I beg your pardon for jumping around a little bit here with this, but when we were looking at the Runlet Park area, the first images and video that was being displayed a moment ago, you had testified on direct about the two-track road. Do you recall testifying that that ran to the west of the Runlet Park area where the skull was found?
It starts basically in the north and runs to the west all the way down the mountain. It becomes a very broken trail until it reaches the area of Five Branches Camper Park at the north end of Vicito Lake.
Above the area where the skull was recovered towards the two-track road is steeper than it would be to come down from Runlet Park, or the road up there. Would you agree?
Yes.
So it's an easier route in from Runlet Park and Middle Mountain Road than it would be from that two-track. Would you agree?
Not necessarily. It would depend on where you're at on that two-track road.
You made some mention on direct about Mr. Redwine not participating in searches, but you're aware that he was organizing searches, right?
I'm aware that he attempted to, yes.
And he had an individual with a dog team that was willing to work with him. Her name's Wendy Kessinger.
Yes, Wendy Kessinger.
And, in fact, law enforcement, the Plata County Sheriff's Office said, we'd rather you not, because Wendy Kessinger had fallen out of favor with the Sheriff's Office. Is that a fair characterization?
No.
Is it fair to say that at one point law enforcement had been working with Wendy Kessinger and her dog?
We worked with Wendy Kessinger in December of 2012.
And at some point, law enforcement determined that Wendy Kessinger was not someone that would be used in further searches. Is that right?
We had reason to believe that she was not reliable.
And that information was conveyed to Mr. Redwine while he was planning his search with her offer to volunteer and help.
I'm not aware of that.
With respect to things that, and I mean, Lieutenant, I get that we're all just human, so you can't be aware of all of the things that are happening in an investigation, but you were aware that Corey Redwine had remarked that law enforcement asked him to stay out of the way. You're aware of that, right?
I heard him testify to that, yes.
But you were never able to identify the law enforcement official who you were ultimately supervising who conveyed that information to Corey Redwine, right?
At the time, I had no reason to do that because I didn't realize it had been done until he testified to that fact.
And in a similar vein, you've not been able to identify which law enforcement official told Mr. Redwine that, right?
I specifically asked that question of my investigators, and the response was in the negative. Nobody told him that.
There were lots of types of sheriff's office deputies and personnel working this case. Agreed?
We had jail deputies, patrol deputies, and investigators.
And additionally, multiple agencies, correct?
We had several different agencies from this area and, excuse me, and from out of the area assisting us.
But suffice to say, at least amongst your crew of investigators, they didn't recall saying anything like, it would be best if you stayed out of our way.
My investigators and some patrolmen were the only personnel that had contact with Mark that I was aware of.
There was some testimony about the work at Mr. Redwine's house, and when Ron Armstrong was finished, provided, and then later a certificate of occupancy was provided. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, I do.
But you were also present when Ron Armstrong was testifying and saying that the house, the work was completed soon after he completed or got the authorization to proceed done in April of 2010, a full year before the certificate of occupancy, right?
That he completed the work in April of 2010?
Well, he said it just took him a couple of months after he had an authorization to proceed, and that would have meant that his work was complete sometime in 2010.
Mr. Champagne?
Objection, Judge. I think that mischaracterizes the testimony of Mr. Armstrong.
Well, you know, there's been so much testimony, I personally don't remember, so I can't rule on that, but I think that's up to the jury to remember. You've made your point, and they'll remember what Mr. Armstrong stated in their collective memories. Go ahead.
The basis or the day that you used to start the possible days Dylan could have been at Mr. Redwine's house was in July of 2011, though, right? When you come up with this calculation of 94 days?
I believe it was starting from April 22nd of 2011.
But it was that certificate of occupancy. That's why you started it there.
Correct.
On June 26, 2013, you were in the area where the femur, tibia, clavicle of Dylan had been found. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You were with an ICE agent, Investigators Gabbard, Dyer, and someone by the name of Hutchins. Does that sound right?
I was with multiple people. We had a large search party.
And on that day, you were part of discovering the bones of a cow, right?
Yes, over behind the gravel pit.
The bones were strewn about, fair?
Yes.
It wasn't the full skeletal remains, right?
I don't believe it was. They were quite dry and sun-bleached. Looked like they had been there for an extended period of time.
Did you ever find the rancher who was missing that cow?
Did not look for a rancher who's missing a cow.
Or how about the ear tag of that dead cow?
Did not look for an ear tag of a dead cow.
Did you find any ear tags of any of the dead cattle that are up between Remain Site 1 and Remain Site 2?
Did not see any ear tags of any cattle up there.
On the day that you went to Remain Site 2, you were with Lee Foster looking for the skull. This would have been November 2nd, 2015. Does that orient you?
Okay.
You searched the area for 4.5 hours, is that right?
That sounds accurate, yes.
And then you were certain you were in the right location based on what you were being told?
Towards the end of the search, yes.
And on that day, you found 2 long bones, is that right?
I'm sorry, I don't recall.
Refresh your recollection to take a look at your report.
Sure.
Commissioner Approach.
Yes.
page 5994.
Okay.
Fair to say that you located 2 long bones that were documented with photos and GPS?
We did, but that was not at the site where the skull was located.
It was that day when you arrived in the search area at Runlet Peak with Leah, right?
Correct, and I can show you the entire area we searched if you'd like.
You write well, in the sentence where you're talking about the long bones, we were certain that we were in the correct area.
Hold on. Your objection.
He doesn't get to just simply read the report into the record. That's not how this works.
I think that's right.
Okay. At the time that the long bones were found, were you certain that we were in the correct area based on the description Leah provided?
Based on the description that Leah provided and the area that she led us into, we were certain that we were in the right search area.
And in that search area, located 2 long bones documented with photos and GPS, right, sir?
Well below the site of the skull.
One of the things that you looked into in 2016 was to contact Colorado State Patrol about DUI contacts in the Vallecito area.
Objection.
Right?
Is this relevant objection?
Relevance beyond the scope.
We had a long talk at the bench about how this scope was created by Mr. Champagne's questioning.
All right. And you're going to have to come up then. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Lieutenant Ezzell, in getting work records for Mr. Redwine, you also learned that vehicles he drove for his employer had GPS units, right?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope.
That's well within the scope of...
It goes into the extent of the investigation. I'm going to let
That's fair to say, right? There were GPS devices on the vehicles Mr. Redwine was driving to the locations in the exhibit that was admitted on direct examination. Fair?
Yes, I was aware of that through other investigators.
And similarly, at least this has to do with United Pipeline, you're aware that Mr. Redwine on the morning of November 19th drove the Chevy to United Pipeline, right?
The white Chevy, yes, his personal vehicle.
And to your knowledge, was any transfer evidence found in that Chevy?
If we're so far beyond the scope, I'm not even.
That's beyond the scope.
Yeah. What's wrong? The exhibit provided to the jury, number 361, has images of bones that were in fact recovered, right?
Could you remind me which?
361, sir. I have a copy if that's not sitting handy. It's got a skeleton on it with red.
Yes.
And that demonstrates bones that were recovered, correct?
Throughout the searches, yes.
And it demonstrates, it shows the earbuds, is that right?
Yes.
And a GPS location was taken at the time those earbuds were recovered, is that right?
Yes.
Same thing with the hair that is on this People's Exhibit 361, GPS coordinates were identified.
To my understanding, they took a single GPS reading for that site between the two deadfalls.
Sir, do you have that GPS reading in front of you?
I do not.
I take it you do not recollect the 12-number location of those items?
That would be correct.
If I showed you a document that Mr. Heidel and I believe yourself helped create, would that refresh your recollection?
I don't know that would help me remember what the numbers were, but it would tell me what the numbers were.
I'm going to object, Judge. I think this is cumulative. It's beyond the scope. 401, 403. It's not really relevant to anything.
But it would help if I understood what you were doing, Mr. Moran. I don't understand where you're going with this.
Judge, the location and items to include earbud and hair were admitted on an exhibit. There was another item located at the precise GPS location that was not included in what's been provided to the jury, and we intend to do so. I want this investigator to confirm that when they created a document that was the data for Google Earth exhibits provided to the jury, that data was correct, and it's missing one item, which is at the precise GPS location of items described and the data points that are at the GPS.
If it's already in, it's already in. I don't think we need to go any further with this witness. If you're going to introduce it to another one, that's great in terms of what you think is missing. Were you going to ask this witness what was missing?
At some point, it may be this witness.
Okay, well, you can do it in your case in chief if you need to.
Permission to approach.
Why? I thought
I'm sorry, to approach the witness. I want to provide him an exhibit to see if he can identify it.
All right. And what exhibit is this? Okay, and it's previously been admitted? Okay.
Sir, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Was this a document that you helped create?
Yes.
Was this document created to demonstrate what the as precise as you could make it, locations of items of evidence where they were recovered and their description?
Yes, based on the information I had.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of a document that you created and you used or was used by the prosecution to create a Google Earth image that's been provided to this jury?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that the GPS or location description for the earbuds is north 37? So this is item 209. If following at home.
Yes, I'm with you.
All right, earbuds, Patterson, GPS location is north 37, 28, .798 west 107.31.876. You agree with me that that's the same number
Yes,
on your document?
yes.
Then I'm going to ask to admit this piece of evidence.
Mr. Champagne?
Judge, although I think that was probably improper, I'm not going to object just to save time and keep things moving forward.
All right, submitted.
So to reorient you, the remains depicted on 361 obviously do not include a spine, right?
Correct.
A spine was never found.
No human spine was ever found.
And other parts of the child that would be in contact with, for instance, a backpack, were also not recovered, right?
Could you rephrase that?
Sure. For instance, the left clavicle or other parts of the child's upper body were not recovered as far as you know, correct?
To my knowledge, everything that was recovered is depicted on this chart.
Thank you. But you believe that it is not out of the realm of probability that there could be some other items of interest or evidence or remains in the area of Middle Mountain to Runlet Park. Agreed?
It's a very large area, very large mountain.
So you agree with the statement that it is not out of the realm of probability that there could be some other items of interest or evidence or remains in the area, correct?
Madam Jack, it certainly requires speculation.
I don't think so. You can answer the question.
I suppose there could be other things up there that we are just unable to find for any number of reasons.
And you would agree that you have specifically testified to the statement, not out of the realm of probability that there could be some other items of interest or evidence or remains in the area, speaking about Middle Mountain, right?
Specifically what I just answered.
Thank you. That's all I have. And I appreciate your patience. It was to comply with court order.
Redirect.
Thank you, Judge. You searched that mountain over and over and over again, didn't you?
Objection leading.
It's all right.
Vague.
No, it's not.
Is that a fair description?
Yes, I put a lot of individual and group miles on foot in many places over the mountain.
You were looking specifically for things like the phone, the backpack, other items related to Dylan.
Correct.
Did you ever find any?
No.
Counsel asked you why you didn't ever hike on the waterfall trail. Could you clarify that answer for me?
Yes, it's not a trail that I was personally aware of, and to my knowledge, that trail was not in existence as an improved trail of any kind in 2012.
If I may, I'm going to object to the witness providing information that's beyond his knowledge. Which is the second part of the record.
You already got it out. That's already in front of the jury anyway. So you're overruled. That was an answer that he gave to your question on cross. Go ahead, Mr. Champagne.
Sorry, complete your answer, Investigator Ezzell.
That is my answer.
Okay. But the trail did not exist in 2012-13?
To my understanding, yes.
But you did search the Vallecito Trail that goes north directly from Mark Redwine's home?
Yes, that was searched. ATV trails in the area were searched.
And you specifically referred to searching the area of the cliffs and below the cliffs, is that correct?
Correct.
And how was that done? You said something about ropes?
Yes, we had personnel on top of the cliffs. We had personnel rappelling down the cliffs, and we had personnel on the ground underneath the cliffs on foot.
I want to be clear with you back to the beginning of the cross-examination when we were talking about the number of days that Mark Redwine's work schedule showed that he was in Colorado. Counsel told you or asked you that it was critical to be accurate on that, correct?
Yes.
And when you were testifying during direct, were you testifying to his work days, known work days in the state of Colorado?
Just work days according to what the schedule showed.
And that was 94 out of 577?
Correct.
And you only know that Dylan Redwine was in Colorado. I believe you've heard testimony that he was here for the Memorial Day trip. Is that right?
Correct.
And counsel asked you about, I think asked you about the Labor Day trip. You know about those, right?
Yes.
Are you aware of any other times that Dylan Redwine was staying at the Vallecito house, specifically?
I'm not specifically aware of any other times that he would have been at the house.
No further questions.
Any questions from the jury? Okay, counsel. All right, Lieutenant Ezzell. There were GPS tracking devices mentioned about being placed on Mr. Redwine's vehicle. Does that mean the two trucks, it says he owns, but I think one was, well, you can clarify. The two trucks involved anyway. Let me read this over just a second. The two trucks he owns had tracking devices since he used them for work travel. Do you understand the question? Because I'm not sure I read it very well.
No, I do not.
Okay. So were tracking devices placed on both trucks, if you know?
Yes.
Was one of those his work truck?
No.
Just his personal trucks?
Just his personal trucks. His work truck was at the office, and that's where it remained.
Okay. And if that doesn't answer the question, you can send another question down. So any follow-up on that?
If I may.
Yes.
Are you aware of the date range in which those GPS trackers were placed on his personal vehicles?
At one time I was aware. I can't recall the date range now.
Okay. Would it be fair to say it was within the first few days or first few weeks of the investigation?
Yes, first few weeks, maybe a month or two.
Okay. And to your knowledge, did those trackers produce anything of evidentiary value in the case?
They did not.
No further questions.
Anything, Mr. Moran?
To be specific about that, did not have evidence of Mr. Redwine driving up and down Middle Mountain Road, depositing things at Remain Site 1 and Remain Site 2, correct?
Wouldn't be able to address the depositing things portion of the question. However, given the location and the type of equipment that was used, the variables on error distances was quite large.
So the answer is no, you did not have any of that evidence derived from the GPS systems that your agency installed, correct?
Correct. When he was up above in that area, I couldn't tell you if the GPS location was putting him right at his house or further away from his house.
Did not have GPS location information to put him at Runlet Park, right?
I think that's the best answer I can give you, what I just did.
Okay. So between, the question mentions work trucks. So law enforcement had the GPS tracking devices on Mr. Redwine's personal vehicles, but also when you were in touch with his employer, became aware that the vehicles he drove for work also had GPS on them, right?
Correct, and those were left parked at his workplace. They were not at his residence during this time period.
But you were able to tell, based on work vehicle and personal vehicle, where Mr. Redwine was, right?
Taking into account what I explained about the margin of error on distances, I couldn't tell you the exact pinpoint area where he was.
Whose GPS devices were those?
I believe they're property of HIDTA. HIDTA, H-I-D-T-A.
What's that?
High-intensity drug trafficking area.
Those are drug task force GPS units attached to Mr. Redwine's personal vehicles, right?
They're
Judge relevance.
You know, I think you're getting kind of far afield.
Okay, that's enough.
So, anything else for this witness from the jury? You can step down.
Your Honor, I beg your pardon. I don't want any implication that there's drug trafficking
I think the jury
implicated here.
There is no implication whatsoever of drug trafficking in this case. It's just another portion of law enforcement. So, you can step down, Mr. Ezzell. Next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, I'll call Jonathan Grusing.
All right. Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Yes, I do. Thank you. Have a seat.
May I inquire, Your Honor?
So that's how you treat our evidence, huh? Go ahead, Mr. Doherty.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your full name, spelling your last name for the record?
My name is Jonathan Grusing. Last name is Grusing.
How are you currently employed?
I'm a special agent with the FBI in Denver.
How long have you been with the FBI?
I was employed in '96, so it's coming up on 25 years.
Can you please briefly walk the jury through your career with the FBI?
For the first 2 years in Denver, I was assigned to a terrorism squad, and then for the next 17 years, I was assigned to a violent crime squad, which we responded to kidnappings, missing persons, bank robberies, and homicides. And the homicides could be either on federal land or like in a federal prison, or if a local sheriff's department or police department needed our resources, we would come help work homicides as well. For the last about 5 years, I've been doing, still working those missing person homicide cases while working public corruption and civil rights matters.
Bless you. You referenced homicides. You said federal lands or federal prisons. And is that because the FBI has original jurisdiction, that's your territory for those kinds of cases?
That's right.
And how do you become involved in homicides committed in a local jurisdiction or state jurisdiction?
Since 2009 or so, I've represented the Behavior Analysis Unit to Colorado, which is our profiling unit out of Virginia, and I will be involved in consults if a department like a sheriff or police need a consult from our profilers. I facilitate that. Sometimes I'll also come in and help them work the case as well if they need that sort of help. So there's kind of two ways, either working on the violent crime side or helping with the behavior analysis portion.
Your Honor, yes, maybe approach.
Yes.
Agent Grusing, back to my question. Oh, sorry, Your Honor, I'm just trying to keep working.
I know Boulder doesn't have court reporters. They fall behind times.
That's a good topic for another day, Your Honor. But the fact that I want to move efficiently is a topic that's been true for a long, long time.
I understand that feeling.
Yes, I imagine you
But
do.
we can quit talking or we'll never get to this.
Is Madam Court Reporter ready, Your Honor?
No, she's writing everything. She's recording everything that we're saying.
No, I understand, but is she ready for me to proceed?
No,
Oh,
because we keep talking.
all right. Thank you, ma'am.
Hold on just a second, because I thought of something funny, but I'm not going to say it. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. You were saying, Agent Grusing, how you get involved in local homicide cases and how the FBI provides assistance, and can you continue your answer that you were giving before we got called up to the bench?
Either one of two ways. I facilitate a consult with our behavior analysis unit, or I come in and work with the request made to our violent crime squad.
Can you give us an example of a case you've worked on in your role with the FBI in helping a local jurisdiction in a homicide case?
Yes, in November of 2018, Kelsey Barrett went missing from Woodland Park, and they're a small department. Our local FBI office in Colorado Springs was helping try to find Kelsey, and they had a request to interview a friend who had come down to see Kelsey's fiance, Patrick Frazee. They couldn't find this woman. Her name's Crystal, and they wanted me to do a phone interview just because I had worked a lot of these missing person cases. We don't normally do phone interviews, but I was able to get a hold of Crystal. Her last name's Lee, L-E-E, and spent about an hour on the phone with her.
And as a result of that conversation, what'd you do in regards to that case, Agent Grusing?
Crystal did not give me a story that was coherent or made any sense with the details of the investigation, so I worked with local departments to get a search warrant for her residence in Twin Falls, Idaho. We went and searched her residence, and she ended up cooperating towards a indictment against Patrick Frazee for the homicide of Kelsey Barrett.
What'd you find during the search of that residence?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to any further inquiry on this line. This is not relevant to the proceedings here.
Mr. Doherty?
Your Honor, I think Agent Grusing is explaining to the jury how the FBI becomes involved in a local case and what role he plays and how that process unfolds in the case, and I think it's important for the jury to understand the context of his involvement in local homicide cases.
Well, I think you've gotten there, so I think you can move on.
Agent Grusing, do you have training and experience in interviewing victims, witnesses, and suspects in cases?
I do.
Tell the jury about that, please.
While working violent crime for over 17 years, that's what we do, is we show up when something happens, and we speak to witnesses, victims, and if we can, the suspects. So I had a lot of field training over 23 years of working criminal matters, and then I also had training from our behavior analysis unit on more of the cognitive interview.
Generally speaking, does the FBI offer assistance and provide assistance in cases involving missing children?
Yes.
And for what ages?
Especially kids, children under age 13, but we will assist a department, child of any age, up to, 17, 18, up to 20. It doesn't really matter. We will offer assistance as soon as a child goes missing, and if that department needs assistance, we get involved quickly because we can offer a lot of resources that that department doesn't have.
What kinds of resources and support can the FBI provide to a local jurisdiction in a case involving a missing child?
We can help them get organized with a command post, which involves our analytical people forming a timeline and figuring out when the person disappeared. We also offer an evidence response team, which I think you guys have heard from already, that will help process a crime scene. We offer cellular analysis, and then we also offer the behavior analysis.
Do you also conduct interviews?
We do.
And tell the jury how you go about conducting interviews generally.
For a missing child, we'll do a very thorough neighborhood investigation, even going house by house, making sure we don't miss any, especially the place where the child disappeared from. Normally it's the residence. We will assist in interviewing the family members, finding family members that weren't there, that sort of thing. Anything that the department is unable to do, we can reach out of state, that sort of thing.
And what's your role with regards to the local jurisdiction, the local agency that's investigating the disappearance of the missing child?
We are assisting them in helping find the child.
Jury is hearing evidence about the disappearance and murder of Dylan Redwine from 2012. Did you become involved in that case, Agent Grusing?
I did.
When did you become involved in the case involving Dylan Redwine?
November 26th of 2012.
How did you become involved?
I was asked to come down to Durango and assist La Plata County in their investigation to find out what happened to Dylan.
And that's the La Plata County Sheriff's Office?
That's correct.
Had they sought and agreed to receive assistance from the FBI in regards to Dylan's disappearance?
They must have, because I got a call from my boss to say go to Durango.
What did you do after arriving in Durango, Agent Grusing?
I met with the sheriff's office, found out what they had to date, and then we figured that it would be a good idea for me to go contact the defendant.
What date was it that you arrived in Durango, Agent Grusing?
I would think it would be the night of November 25th.
And after meeting with the folks at the sheriff's office, did you come up with a game plan for going to interview the individuals involved?
We did.
And what was your plan?
I would go with a couple of investigators from the sheriff's department, take an agent with me, and offer our assistance to the defendant in helping find his son.
When you say the defendant, are you referring to an individual you then met and now know as Mark Redwine?
Yes.
Do you see that individual in this courtroom here today?
I do.
Can you please point to that individual, identifying an article of clothing that he's wearing for the record?
Sitting to my far left of the defense table, wearing a gray jacket and black shirt.
Record will reflect identification of Mr. Redwine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent Grusing, on what date did you first go to the defendant's residence to conduct the investigation?
November 26th.
What was the reason or reasons you wanted to speak with the defendant, Agent Grusing?
The sheriff's office was having trouble rectifying some of his statements with what they believe happened with Dylan, and they were asking for a more thorough interview to be done. As well, there was not a great timeline to find out exactly when he disappeared, and that was my goal, was to speak with the defendant and find out as best I can exactly when Dylan disappeared.
And what was the defendant's relationship to Dylan Redwine?
He was his father.
Approximately what time did you go to the defendant's house?
I don't recall the exact time, but it was late morning or maybe just after lunch. It was around that time period.
Who'd you go with, Agent Grusing?
I went with Special Agent Russ Humphrey, who came up here with me from Denver, and then investigators Tom Cowing and Dan Patterson from the sheriff's office.
Can you tell the jury, please, what happened when you arrived at the defendant's residence?
Well, I knocked on the door, introduced myself. He let us in the house. I explained what I do and why I'm there, and that I'm there basically working on the family's behalf, trying to find out what happened to Dylan, and that we wanted to cooperate with the defendant in this investigation.
What was the reason you said that to him?
Because I did not, throughout my relationship with the defendant, I did not want to be confrontational because I wanted as much information from him as possible. So my goal was to speak to him in a very disarming manner so he would feel comfortable sharing information with me.
What was the defendant's reaction when you explained your purpose there?
He seemed willing to cooperate.
What was one of the first things you asked the defendant to do after you arrived at the house?
Before we started asking questions, I asked him to fill out what we call a free narrative, which is a written statement.
What's the reason you start with the free narrative before getting into questions of the defendant?
It allows him to articulate from beginning to end of the day of the disappearance of what happened in his own words. And we, as investigators, would not be interrupting him with questions.
What kind of paper or form did you use when you asked the defendant to complete a free narrative of what had taken place?
It's a real simple FBI form that just has a couple sentences on the top that gives him some instructions to be detailed, even small things matter, and just ask him to start writing.
And what are you looking for in having an individual, and in this case the defendant, write out a statement in their own words?
We're looking for where they provide a lot of detail and then where they choose not to provide detail. What we found is anyone who is wishing to hide something.
I'm going to object on the basis discussed at the bench. Falsito case is the basis for this objection. I can make further record if necessary at the bench, please.
Well, I'm not sure. This is why he's doing it. I'm not sure we're getting into what you were concerned about at the bench. Did you want to respond at all, Mr. Doty?
If I need to, Your Honor, I can.
I don't think you need to.
Thank you, Your Honor.
At this point, you're overruled.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I think that what was just mentioned is the first part of it, which is acceptable, and part two is where we've got concerns. So.
Well, perhaps, but it's talking about investigative techniques is the way I understand this and why they did what they did. So I'm going to allow it.
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent Grusing, go on, please.
We are simply looking for where someone is very detailed and where they are vague in the written statement.
What's the reason you're looking for details or when someone's vague?
We have found through doing a lot of these over the years that if someone wants to hide something like their time at a bank robbery, they would articulate what they did in the morning around the time of the robbery.
Hold on a second. There's still another. It's the same objection?
I beg your pardon for the interruption, but yes, and it's Salcido v. People, 999 Pacific 2nd, 833, Colorado Supreme Court from 2000. There's also a Colorado Revised Statute 24-31-3091A, precisely on the type of testimony that's started, and I can see where it's going.
2431?
24-31-309. 1A.
All right, can the two attorneys approach, please? All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent Grusing, can you go on with your answer that you were giving before we approached the bench? And I could re-ask the question if you need me to.
We hand out written statements to people for two reasons. One is to give them an uninterrupted chance to give us a statement. And the second is it's an investigative piece to see where they're very specific and then where they're vague. And in doing a lot of these over the years, a person is normally vague when he or she does not want us to know about a certain time.
And is that why one of the first steps that you took in this investigation was to ask the defendant to complete a free narrative, a written statement?
Yes.
And you're looking for details, but also vague statements or omissions.
Correct.
How long did the defendant take to complete the written statement?
I believe it's about 15 or 20 minutes.
Was he interrupted at all?
He was not.
Where did he complete the written statement?
I believe he was at the table when you walk in the room to my left a little bit.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what's been previously marked as People's Exhibit 173, and it's also been provided to counsel previously?
Yes.
Mr. Moran, do you need to see it again? Agent Grusing, do you recognize Exhibit 173?
I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
It's the FBI free narrative form.
Is it the form that the defendant in this case filled out on November 26, 2012?
It is.
How do you recognize it to be the same free narrative that the defendant completed?
He has dated it in the top left-hand corner, written his name, and then signed his name.
Does it appear to be a fair and accurate, in fact, exact copy of the narrative that the defendant completed on November 26, 2012?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the people move 173 into evidence.
Mr. Moran?
Incorporating previous objections, understanding the court's ruling.
Your previous objections are already of record. It is admitted.
Your Honor, at this point, I would have Agent Grusing put it on the screen and read it to the jury, so this might be a good time for our break before we get into that.
Okay. Let's take our afternoon break. We'll start up again about 3:15. Everybody rise to the jury.